So finally, this poor guy, I see this guy, he's probably about 30 years old. He was looked like a businessman, just kind of trying to do his job, going back home. And I saw him and I grabbed Sin by the elbow, and I went over to him and I grabbed him by his elbow as he was walking up to the turnstile. And he didn't understand what we were saying because I'm speaking English, but I said, "We're going through with you." And he just kind of, looked at me, and he passed through, and we just went with him. We just stuffed ourselves in there and went with him. And then he ran as fast as he could away from us after we got through.
Get me away from these crazy Americans.
Yeah, really. But we got out at least, and we were able to go.
Welcome to the Where Have You Been podcast. I'm your host, Bill Ream, and each week on the pod, I have conversations with incredible guests from all walks of life. Expect to hear funny, crazy, emotional, life-changing, and even sometimes life-threatening stories and experiences that will entertain and inspire you. As always, I appreciate your likes, subscriptions, ratings, and reviews wherever you are listening. It doesn't sound like much, but it truly helps the pod get to the ears of more people who may enjoy it. And check out the website, whybpodcast.com, for links to the socials where you can find pictures from the guests and their stories, and also buy merch if you're so inclined. Now let's get to this week's episode. Thank you for being here.
And as always, welcome back to another episode of the Where Have You Been podcast. Of course, I'm your host, Bill Ream, and I could not be more excited or ecstatic for our guest that we have today. We continue week after week to have very unique perspectives on travel and very unique guests with different backgrounds and things that they're going through. And we've had plenty of authors on, but I don't think anything quite like this. And so I am very pleased to introduce a local Pittsburgher, actually, whom is probably the first person since my first handful of episodes, which were with dear friends of mine, who I've actually met in person. So I'd like to actually let you introduce yourself, if you don't mind, Chip, if you would tell our listeners, who are you?
Well, okay. I'm Chip Walter, and I am an author and traveler, National Geographic explorer, a former CNN bureau chief. I've written now 6 books, 1 novel, 3 screenplays, multiple documentaries. So I've kind of been all over the map. I grew up in Pittsburgh, but I lived in Atlanta and Boston and San Francisco, Los Angeles. And frankly, I love Pittsburgh. We're perfectly happy to be here. And this is a great place to be and to grow up. And also it's a great platform for travel.
Yeah, and I probably shouldn't word it that way. I say fellow Pittsburgher because we're both here now. And you're back, and I've lived here for about 15 years. But I'm a transplant. You're actually a true Pittsburgher. So
yeah, I was born and raised here.
Yeah, and I think as impressive as what you've said, as far as your background goes, I feel like it's almost even understated and underplayed. I mean, you have an incredible journey that you're on now that's being documented, that you're documenting as you go. You have an incredible website, and one of your books, I don't know if listeners would care to know or not, and I'm sure it's maybe not the greatest thing you've ever done. Maybe it is, but you co-wrote a book with William Shatner, of all people.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Tell us about all of that stuff, if you would. I want people to learn more about you.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you first about the book that I wrote with Bill Shatner. That was the second book that I wrote.
And look at that, and you're on that basis with Bill instead of William.
Yeah.
Love it.
We're still friends. We had a great time working on that book together. The concept. Well, what happened was I got a call from my agent. This is around 1999, so it's been a few years. And they said, William Shatner is interested in working with you on a book, and so would you like to talk to him? And I said, well, I've heard that he's kind of not very nice. And they said, oh, no, he's great. And I guess at the time Bill had something of a reputation for that. But in any case, they said, no, he's great. He's going to give you a call. So unfortunately, whenever he called, I think I had the flu. So I was just trying to have as much energy and concentration in the conversation as I possibly could. But he couldn't have been nicer. He was really sweet right from the get go. And we kind of kicked this idea around, and the idea became how the technologies that were envisioned by Star Trek, especially in the 60s, whenever he was Captain Kirk, were coming true in the 21st century. And so I knew a lot about the science. I wasn't a Trekkie. I mean, yeah, I wasn't a Trekkie. But I had watched, a lot of the shows. So I had a good grounding in the shows themselves, but I also had a good grounding in the science because that was my beat. That's what I wrote about. I wrote about, futuristic science and high tech and artificial intelligence and all those sorts of things. And so I wrote up a proposal, and Simon and Schuster, made a deal, and we went off on a kind of road trip, really. And we went all over the country and talked with fascinating scientists, a couple of Nobel laureates, people that I had found that could discuss, nanotechnology, artificial intelligence, virtual reality, you know, could we create a teleporter, that kind of stuff. And, just kind of mapped reality against what Star Trek imagined and had a really fun time with the book. And the book,
wait, did
did
you
well.
did you say could recreate a teleporter?
Yeah, well, that was one of the things that we discussed. Would it be possible to create a teleporter? Actually, if there was one thing in the Star Trek universe that's probably not possible, it's creating a teleporter.
Okay.
It would take all of the energy in the universe, basically, to discombobulate one person, so that they could be beamed somewhere else. But that made an interesting story in and of itself. So we wrote about time machines, anything that had been discussed or imagined in Star Trek. We tried to go down, find the scientists who really knew, would this be possible? Was it possible? Was it happening? And if it did happen, how did it happen? And we just had a good time with it. And there was a lot of science in it, but there was a lot of, I kind of created this character that was part me, part him. And we just wrote it in Bill's voice in the first person. And it was kind of a journey, when you think about it. So it's a real fun book. It's an easy read, but it's loaded with a lot of good science.
What is the name of that one?
It's called I'm Working on That. And Bill chose that title. It's a great little story because Stephen Hawking, who was alive then, was traveling through the set of Star Trek at the time that they were doing the reboot for Star Trek. And as they were kind of taking him through different parts of the set, he kind of pointed over at the warp drive, and he said, "What's that?" And they said, "Well, that's a warp drive, and it enables you to travel faster than the speed of light." And he kind of looked at it, and then he said, "Well, I'm working on that."
Oh my gosh!
And so that became, and when Bill heard that story, he just said, "Oh my God, that's the title." So we went with that.
Awesome.
Yeah. It was fun. We had a good time, and we still have great conversations. He and I, he traveled coach right next to me. He didn't travel first class or anything. Picked up his own bags, took them everywhere. He never had an entourage or anything with him. And we'd go out to dinner every night and just have great, multi-hour conversations, and then hit the road the next day and see who the next scientist was.
That's so awesome.
It was.
So what is your background in younger years that kind of took you into this? Or were you always interested in science fiction, or I guess science as not even just science fiction?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, the disease I have is I'm interested in everything. So I'm just intensely curious about, almost anything I come across. But, as a kid, of course, like a lot of kids, I read comic books, and comic books in a weird way introduce you to science or science fiction. Whenever I was, I think I was probably like 12 or 13, I remember sitting down and finding a book at the library called The Martian Chronicles by Ray Bradbury. And I read that book. I think I might have read it that night. And I immediately sat down and wrote my first short story.
Oh, wow.
It had such an effect on me. And it was so good, so well written, so creative and compelling. But I always enjoyed writing. So, and I got a lot of feedback about that. And so I think by the time I got out of high school, I was ready to be a writer. And then by the time I got out of college, I remember my senior year, I said, one way or another, I'm not going to go on to school or anything, but one way or another, I'm going to make my living writing. And sometimes my wallet was pretty thin, but eventually I was able to do that.
Yeah. Kudos to you for setting your mind to something and making, I don't know if I want to say your dreams come true, but your aspirations at least.
Yeah. I mean, I like to say I was just too stupid not to know how hard it was going to be.
Sometimes that's all it takes.
Yeah, right. And especially whenever you're, 22 years old, you just, the first job I got, the only job I could get where people would pay me to write was newspapers. So I started with newspapers and I worked my way into magazines, and then I went into news, and I wrote the 6 o'clock news, the 11 o'clock news, and it became an assignment editor here in KDKA. And then out of nowhere, I got a call to ask if I'd be interested in joining this new cable network that Ted Turner was starting, that they were going to call Cable News Network. Nobody knew anything about it. But I said, well, sure.
I said, who wants a 24-hour news network? How is that even going to work?
Right. I mean, it sounded insane.
Especially back then, there was no internet back then. There was no, getting the news stories wasn't as easy as it is today. Right.
And that 24-hour kind of maw, it was just a monster that had to be filled all the time. But anyhow, they said, well, we'll fly you down to Atlanta and, see what you think. And so I went down, and my first interview was, they didn't even have the offices or the studios completed yet. So I met in a little old, kind of Victorian house that was in Atlanta. And I think it had one light bulb in the room. It looked like the Bates Motel. And so I thought, is this for real? And they said, oh, well, come on, we'll take you over to where we're building the new building and everything. And I thought, wow, this is different. It's, I'd been at KDKA, I think 2.5 years or so. And so I was ready for a change, and it was definitely a massive change. And it was crazy right out of the gate. The day that we started the network on June 1st, 1980, I had 2 phones in my ear, and, it was insane for the next, I stayed there for about 2.5 years there. It was really interesting, but really intense.
That's gotta be cool to say that you were part of getting CNN off, like launching that, which is such a massive thing today.
Yeah. I mean, it's such a part of the culture now. Worldwide. I mean, anywhere I travel, if you turn on a television, CNN is there. So it's kind of cool. In some ways it's fascinating to be a part of that. In some ways, I also feel like we became part of the 24-hour news cycle, which is, behind a lot of the political issues that happened, and a lot of the fracturing of things, of points of view. And people can get into bubbles because now there's, different cable channels, that have different political points of view, and
Yeah.
I'm not sure that's all good. But and it's also because you have to fill that 24-hour hole. It got very, very quickly. Cable news networks started to develop, shows that, how do I say it, encouraged drama and conflict. Because that's what's interesting. So that part of me wishes maybe we didn't go that direction, but it's the way it is, and it's still a great service because when things start to go sideways around the world, that's the place people want to go. They want to understand what's going on. They do a good job at it.
Yeah, for sure. And they've had some huge names there over the years, and it's probably still my go-to, just to be honest, for what it's worth.
Yeah.
And,
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, it was unique, and Ted Turner deserves a lot of credit because, you talk about someone who is, he pretty much would try anything. And if he wanted to do something, he went for it. And that was something when I saw that, I saw him around occasionally. I remember thinking that's a good approach. Just go for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And then probably, not to get off on, we're way off base from travel, but this is very interesting. It probably, if not for CNN becoming the first 24/7 something network,
Mm-hmm.
we probably wouldn't have ESPN, or maybe we would, but these other types of networks maybe would have been way down the road. But they kind of put that model in place to say, here, this can work. You can have 24/7 of something.
Yeah, I mean, the big breakthrough that Ted Turner had was he had a meeting in New York, and he saw satellites for HBO, and HBO was one of the first cable networks. And he saw these big satellites, and he said, "What's that doing? What is that doing?" They explained it to him, and that's when he came up with the idea of taking Channel 17, and turning it into a national network. It was just a local network that was hardly making any money that he owned. And he said, well, I'm just going to beam this up to everybody and, put some, content out there, and we're going to sell advertising, and then that was when he came up with the idea for CNN along with Reese Schoenfeld, who was became the president. And that was the idea, is let's just put it up on a satellite and let's beam the news, whatever's going on, let's get it out there.
Yeah. It's awesome. It's a great story. And and then you went on from there and you did some stuff with National Geographic, right?
Yeah, not immediately, but pretty quickly. After I left Cable News Network, I ended up the bureau chief in San Francisco for CNN.
Wow.
And so then when I quit, I moved to Los Angeles. And while I was in Los Angeles, I took a few months off and just read books, because I was so wiped out from all the intense news coverage of everything.
Oh, you had to be running nonstop, pretty much.
Oh, yeah. It wasn't unusual to work 14, 15 hours, every day. For a long time, constantly moving and constantly under pressure. So a lot of times it was exciting, but it's not really sustainable if you're going to try to do that. Eventually it's going to catch up with you. So I really wanted to, find something that I could dig my teeth into, but I couldn't quickly find it. And so anyhow, I was in Los Angeles and I worked with a cameraman that I had worked with out of the Los Angeles bureau, and he and I decided to start a little video company. So we started a company called Nighthawk Productions, which I really don't talk about much, but for a couple of years I worked with Tim there, and because cable was just really taking off, now there were travel channels and there were entertainment channels. And so those were two places. When you're in Los Angeles, you can do entertainment pieces and you can do travel. So we traveled all over the place. We went to Tahiti, we went to Hawaii, we shot the Super Bowl of poker, we shot the World Series of poker. And so that was just fun. It was nice to do for a couple of years, but I still wanted to really kind of dig my teeth into something and do some documentaries. And I finally, I just had the word out, and I finally ran into literally the producer or the man who had come up with the idea for Cosmos, which was one of the great series with Carl Sagan.
Absolutely.
And that was back in the early 90s or 80s. And so Greg Andorfer was one of the guys that came up with that concept. And I ran into him, and he eventually got a project at WQED, which ironically is based in Pittsburgh, but they had big offices in Los Angeles because they did the National Geographic specials there. And so we got this series called Planet Earth. And
I've heard of it. I've heard of it.
Yeah. And he asked me if I'd like to come on, and so I did. And I wrote and co-produced 2 of those shows. The series won an Emmy, which was great. And then we created, actually with Greg, I co-created and developed another series called Infinite Voyage. And that became the first PBS series to also be aired on network television. And then they asked me to do the inaugural show for that. And that was called Fires of the Mind.
It's okay. And listen, I was absolutely being sarcastic. Of course. I mean, I think everybody's heard of Planet Earth and Infinite Voyage. Like these are groundbreaking, momentous, classic. If anyone hasn't watched any of these, even today, you should, because they're incredible. They were so well done.
Thanks for saying that. I think you can.
Yeah.
Still, obviously, they were great fun. I remember someone walking down the hallway with me when I was there. There were all these great people from National Geographic that I was just, soaking up as much information as I could. And someone said to me, "Hey, Chip, how's it going?" And I turned around and said, "Well, I'm traveling the world. I'm meeting the most interesting people you can possibly imagine, and I'm getting paid for it. So I'm pretty happy."
Things are good.
Yeah. And they were. That was a lot of fun. So the last thing that happened after I did the Infinite Voyage piece, they asked me to do another one. It was going to be about chaos. I didn't want to do another documentary. I was trying to figure out what the next thing to do was, and so they asked if I would develop a new series that they hoped would get funded, and it was called Space Age, and that was for the International Space Year in 1991 or 92. So anyhow, I said, sure, that sounds interesting. So I went off for, I don't know, probably a year and researched that and wrote it. And then they asked if I would be the executive producer of the series. We got the funding for it. And it was going to be the premier, PBS series. And I said, I want to write the book and not executive produce the series. Maybe I should have executive produced the series because the series did not do that well. But I really enjoyed writing the book. And how that happened was I just happened to write an article about the space station for someone who asked me to write it for a magazine. And I received this letter. This is the letter that every writer wants to receive. And it was total serendipity. I opened up the letter, and it was from an editor at Random House. And he said, "I really enjoyed your article about the space station. Would you like to write a book for us?" And I said, "Yeah, and by the way, there's this series that we're developing for PBS, so I think that would be the book." And of course, they loved that because, it was a PBS series. They thought Civil War had done so well. And so then that was my first book. And I really enjoyed writing it. I wish the series had done better, but the book got good reviews, and I enjoyed writing it. And then I I actually took a break from writing because by that time I had moved back to Pittsburgh and I was now an executive at WQED, National Programming Executive. And so my job was to develop new ideas. And then eventually I did hooked up with Bill Shatner, and that's when, and it was partly because of this connection with Space Age that my agent connected him with Bill Shatner, because I had a background in space and technology. And that was kind of, all those documentaries were the reasons why I got into science. I, went to a Jesuit high school. It was all about writing. It was all about language. It was all about philosophy. There wasn't much science in it. I was always fascinated with science, but I didn't really know it very well. I wasn't particularly good at it. But whenever I got into these documentaries, and they were all about science, and the scientists that I met, it was like, each project was like a PhD in that area. And so I just loved it, and it really taught me a lot, and it informed all the books that I've written since then, because I essentially came to believe that, we have philosophy, we have religion, we have psychology, which is a science, I suppose,
Mm-hmm.
but, hard science was a way to really try to understand the world and try to figure out, why do we do the things that we do? Where did we come from? Why does the world work the way it works? What motivates us? And of course, that's all really important to a writer and a novelist or a screenwriter, because you want to understand those things, because that's what drives character and that's what drives plot. So it all was kind of working for me. And I just consider myself very, very fortunate to have some of these breaks come my way. Sometimes they come your way, sometimes they don't. But, I was lucky.
Yeah. Well, lucky, and I'm sure a lot of it was because of the things that you did. And yeah, like, maybe the right decisions were made and such. But we've definitely spent way more talking about you than, and I'm not, this isn't a bad thing. I typically, it's a very short kind of bio about who you are, but your background and like how you got to where you are today was so fascinating to me that I think it's worth it, because I think your story is incredible. And I think we haven't even gotten to what you're doing now. But
first, thanks.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. But the travel that we're doing and the travel that I've been fortunate to do is, it's one of the biggest things, one of the most important things in our lives right now.
Yeah. Well, so I want to ask you, before we get to the bulk of the episode, which is where I actually ask you, where have you been? And it's going to be one that you don't really specifically have to answer. You probably want to answer where you haven't been, but I just am curious to know, was travel a part of your life before? Well, actually, you know what? Before I do that, because I don't want to forget, can you just tell people your websites? I guess there's a couple main ones. And then if you have any socials that you can advertise, I'd like people to know where to find you before we forget.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate that. Well, for travel, we have a website, a very extensive, website where I am essentially telling the story of our travel, called vagabond-adventure.com. And there's also chipwalter.com, which is all about my writing and my books. And there is a site called Polar Steps, which follows our journey around the world, which we'll be talking about, through all 7 continents, never traveling by jet. And then, of course, there's Facebook page. So there's author Chip Walter on Facebook and Vagabond Adventure on Facebook. And Instagram. I think Instagram is called Chipperoo. And we're just now starting to reach out to TikTok, but I don't know what the name is on that yet. We're still working on it.
And it looks like on the vagabond-adventure.com site, if you're interested in following Chip with the socials, I think they're all linked there as well. So that might be an easy way to find them.
Right. Absolutely.
So for the listeners, absolutely. For the listeners, you are traveling around the world to all the continents, and I'm trying to get to most every country. if I'm not mistaken, without
Well, we're
using
trying,
airplanes.
right. Well, the goal from the beginning was to reach all seven continents,
Right.
which is pretty rare because, I mean, if you look at Mark Twain's, books about travel or, um, well, almost any travel um, around the world that involves going around the world. Usually it's equatorial, you kind of circle the globe that way. When
Mm-hmm.
you when you cover the whole planet, or all of the continents on the planet, all seven of them, you end up zigzagging, up and down the planet. So you cover way more ground. And when you're especially covering it, not traveling by jet, uh, you know, we're only probably a little more than halfway around the planet, and we've already covered 125,000 miles. That doesn't count any other travel we've done, by jet to go back home to see Cindy's mom, or anything. But those are miles that we've covered on land or on sea, one, you know, 1 mile at a time. So you can imagine what we've seen,
Yeah,
and it's been spectacular.
it's completely amazing, and I can't wait to get to, like, you and I have talked about like how the journey started and when you think it might end and kind of where you're going next and where you've been. But before we do that, I'm just very interested, and I asked this question to, I believe, every one of my guests is, so I know that when you started doing things like the National Geographic type stuff and they were paying you to travel, that became a thing. And you obviously had done some traveling in the United States for work and whatever. But like, was travel a thing for you when you were a kid or when you were growing up, or really did it become a thing more for your career?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I was just a born traveler. And I think the reason has to do with curiosity. Curiosity is one of those things that makes you want to go around the next bend or over the next hill. I didn't think about it as a kid, but we had, forest behind our house. So I would explore that. And that was kind of one of the places I could travel to, and I felt like it was huge and fascinating. So I think, and then I was a newspaper boy, so I read, the newspaper every day, and I was reading about the world. I was saying, well, yeah, well, I want to go to those places.
But that's not necessarily a normal thing, Chip, because I helped deliver papers and stuff when I was a kid. I didn't read them. I just tossed them and hoped to get a tip at holiday time.
Yeah, well, I was all for the tips too, but because I was walking around, I'd pull the paper out and I'd read it in between each place that I had to drop the paper off. So and we would go on trips to, the beach and that sort of thing when I was a kid, and I just loved it. I loved going to see my grandparents. It's like just because we were going to someplace different.
Mm-hmm.
And so I absolutely from the get-go wanted to travel. And
like exploring, it sounds like.
Yeah, right. It's just a kind of version of satisfying your curiosity, and so whenever I could get to the point where someone would pay me to write, about something, and I could travel while I was at it, well, that was just too
That's
good
the
to be
dream.
true. Yeah,
Man.
yeah, absolutely. And the only downside to it was that I was always busy working, so I would see the places, but I didn't always have the opportunity to really explore them because it was, if I was doing a documentary, we'd be, in the Amazon rainforest, and, you're still experiencing it, but you're also so busy because you have to shoot things and, make sure people are in the right places and everything. But I'm not complaining.
And then your memories are almost attached to whatever you recorded or wrote about it because you were working.
Right. Yeah. And yeah, so it was very work oriented, but still, like when we went to the Serengeti, we had to travel, 100 miles on, in some van over washboard roads. And, we still got to stop and see Maasai warriors and, things like that. So again, I'm not complaining, but all it did was make me want to travel more.
Mm-hmm.
and travel with that. And ironically, what we're doing now, I'm writing all the time, but we have more time to really enjoy it.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask the question now, and it's kind of hokey. I probably don't even really need to do this anymore, but it's the premise of the podcast. And I've always done it at some point. I always ask the question, Chip, where have you been? I'm not expecting you to actually answer that question because we're going to kind of get there, I think. So instead of actually you answering the question, where have you been, unless you'd like to, I guess how I would like to start off our section where we maybe start telling some really cool stories is, first of all, what made you come up with the idea to do this massive scale? And you've been doing this now for what, years, I think, right?
4 years, yeah.
4 years. I mean, I almost want to say it's insane, but it's not. It's just incredible. I think it's a little insane to think that you'll be able to do this, and I know you will. It's a grand undertaking, but I envy the ever-loving crap out of you and your life. And so I can't wait to continue living this vicariously through you. How did this become a thing? And tell us kind of like the start of it.
Yeah, I've thought about that. I think how it began was I was sitting in bed with my wife, and I was going over. There must have been a location in the world. I'd sort of discovered Google Earth, and so I thought, oh wow, you can like go from Cairo to India, and you can just kind of follow it this way. And so I was playing around with that. And I was in the middle of writing Immortality, Inc., which was my most recent nonfiction book. And that was for National Geographic. And so I kind of had it in my head how long it would take to get the book done and get it promoted. And then we'd be free. So I said to Cindy, I thought Cindy would just immediately say, no, you're insane.
She may have still thought the insane part, but...
Yeah. But the idea was, I said, we should, when I finish this book and it's promoted and it's behind us, we should travel, but travel in a really interesting way. I mean, we had done travel already, but do something different. And I thought, what would that be? And I thought, well, not traveling by jet, it would be like traveling 120 years ago. And it would force us to really pass through, each country, to kind of marinate in the culture and the language and the food and the music and, just everything. I mean, there was no way you were going to be jetting across some place at 40,000 feet and literally overlooking, the places you could be traveling through and people you meet, so as a writer, I just thought this is the way to do it. Also because, as I said before, when I was in my 20s, I was too stupid to know what I was doing. I guess this is kind of like that. I mean, it's hard to do what we're doing, but it's also incredible. That's a poor word. It doesn't really do it justice. It's been spectacular, and it's been absolutely mind-changing. But that was the idea. And I thought, like I said, Cindy would just say, no way are we doing that. But she kind of bought into it. We were just, we called it our 5-year plan, not because we expected to travel 5 years, but that was kind of almost that many years before we actually started, because I had to get through the book, do the research, write the book, get the book, out there and promoted. And so it took a few years before we actually began. But on September 27th, 2021, we walked our bags. We had it all planned, what kind of bags we needed, what kind of clothing we would need, how to carry the bags so that we could be mobile. And we sold our house, got an apartment downtown Pittsburgh, and we hit the road. We literally walked to the train station and we got started. Now, COVID was kind of in the middle of this, so that changed a lot of things for us, but that's part of the story.
Is that partially because some places were still not accessible, or just travel restrictions things were different?
Yes,
overall?
yes. I mean, and COVID kind of struck in March of 2020.
Mm-hmm.
And so by September 2021, what you could do is you could travel around the United States and Canada, but we couldn't get to any other continent. Everything was shut down and all the shipping was shut down, and we needed ships to get, across the sea. So it was Cindy who came up with the idea. She said, well, look, let's still hit the road, but we'll just do North America first instead of last. That was the original plan. We were originally just going to go directly down through the Caribbean to South America and then on to Antarctica.
I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think right around that time of September, October was maybe when certain parts of the world were just starting to open back up, because I want to say, my listeners are sick of me hearing me talk about this. My daughter went to school in Prague, and she had wanted to go there after high school terribly, and then or overseas to somewhere, Europe somewhere, and it was all closed off. So she had actually been accepted to Mizzou and had everything. We were set. She had her roommate. We was all paid for. And then, like right when school was going to start, this university in Prague opened up, at least. So she was a little late getting there, but yeah, it was like, I want to say it was October. So but I remember that time there was still a lot of countries were off limits.
Yeah, it was very tricky. I mean, we couldn't get anywhere in South America. Chile, Peru, they were all shut down. And again, the ships were really our biggest problem.
Yeah, because you're not taking planes. Right.
Right. And even trains, to some degree. I mean, you had to have masks everywhere. Whenever we first got to New York, like the next day, our first day traveling, you had to have a proof that you had taken, the vaccine.
Vaccinations.
If you even wanted to get into a restaurant. So it was interesting, but at least we had some difficulty getting into Canada, but we got in. And so initially we went up to Nova Scotia and then all the way to the top of Newfoundland. And then we came back through and across the United States by train and then out to the American West. And eventually all the way down, we drove the Baja 1000, to the bottom of Baja, and then came back up the west coast of the United States by train into Vancouver, and then we worked our way back to Pittsburgh, because then that was probably 6 months, no, maybe more. No, it was almost a year later. Everything started to open up more. So we realized we could get to Morocco. And for some reason, I had it in my head that we should go to Morocco. So we took the Queen Mary 2 across the Atlantic and then kind of booked it by train down to Morocco and then worked our way up to Europe. And then at that point, Sin said, hey, I think we can get down to Antarctica. And so we came back to the States and headed south. And
let me ask you two questions real quick. Well, yeah.
Sure.
So first question is, how much, well, I guess so many questions. So I want to know how much planning happened ahead of time. I'm sure a ton of it, but how much planning had to happen on the fly because things were ever changing? And even today, how much of your planning is ahead of time? You try, I'm sure, but how much do things alter as things are going on? And then throughout that, and if I can just keep throwing stuff at you, that first kind of stage, maybe that first year or so of your travels, are there any just one or two stories that just stand out to you that you could share with us, that happened in some detail?
Yeah, I could go on and on. Well, the first thing about the planning was, I plotted a route around the world and in plotting it, tried to avoid places that we had already been. But the main thing was, and the original plan was to go down south, go through South America onto Antarctica, and then there was a ship that would take us to South Africa, and then we were going to work our way up the east coast of Africa, and then into Europe, and then over to Asia. Well, COVID canceled the ship to Africa. So when we finally did come back, we kind of had to reorganize our route, but it more or less follows that general idea. How do we plan? So the plans were very broad that way. So we knew, okay, we're going to go through the Caribbean to Peru. So I find a ship. And sometimes if we couldn't find a ship, then we'd say, well, okay, we're not going to Peru, we're going somewhere else. But in this case, we could get a ship from Florida to Peru. And so we did that. And then from there, and I won't go into all this detail, but the idea was while I was on the ship, I was talking to an agent who was helping us get organized in Peru so that we could get to an ancient Incan palace that almost nobody goes to called Choqquequirao. Everybody goes to Machu Picchu. We went to Choqquequirao, and that'll be one of the stories I'll tell you about our most fascinating places. But in general, it's kind of, sometimes we were completely on our own. Sometimes we had help. And sometimes we were we went all through Chile with really not very much help. And we got ourselves, down to Ushuaia and then to Antarctica. We got a ship there and, we just kind of did it and spent 10 amazing days down there.
Tell me your feelings about Antarctica. We talked about this already, and I know, just raw beauty and surreal.
It's mind blowing. I mean, there's no place like it. It's almost like another planet because it's so untouched and so different. It's cold. We were there in the middle of summer, so it wasn't, like 200-mile-an-hour winds at 50 below zero. But, everything it's just ice and snow and icebergs. And so, I always tell the story that it takes 2 days to cross the Drake Passage, which is the wildest water in the world. 3 oceans that come together there. And so for 2 days, you're just rolling, over the ocean and, swinging all around. Doors are
trying
swinging
not
all
to
over
be
the
sick.
place and everything. Yeah. And then you get, and then, this is happening. And then on the last night, you go to sleep and everything's rolling around all over the place. And then when we woke up the next morning, it was just dead quiet and still. And I went, oh, we're here. And I jumped up and I looked out the porthole and all I saw were huge, truly immense icebergs. The icebergs aren't as big as buildings. They're as big as neighborhoods, and it's just kind of drifting by you. And then huge mountains and glaciers and mountain valleys, that are just pristine white. And then, of course, when we got a chance to go out in our Zodiacs and then on kayaks, we saw, whales going by that, were 30 feet long, right there, going right there, right by us. Sometimes in the Zodiacs, they went right under us. And
what is
penguins.
I'm sorry my ignorance, but what is a Zodiac?
Oh, it's one of those kind of motorized, blown up boats, that everyone gets in them, and they're just like a giant raft, basically, except they're shaped like a boat, and so they skim across the water very easily. And in some days we could go out on the Zodiac, and then we could get into kayaks, and then we'd really be, on the water. That was unbelievable. And then, of course, you meet fascinating people because, they're dedicated travelers, people that do this, and the guides themselves, the people that work on the ship, they've been all over the place. But that's a whole nother story. The people that we meet on these trips, and because the way we travel, we're not traveling into a resort and then traveling back out. We're not traveling by jet, So we're on buses, we're on trains, we're just hiking. We're walking through the neighborhoods of a city, And, you just meet people that you wouldn't meet if you were on a resort. That's for sure.
Well,
And
listen, let's go. Like my instinct was to go chronologically, but I don't think it's necessarily because I don't want to miss things.
yeah,
So it sounds how important it was. Some of these people that you've met and some of these interactions that you've had, while it's front of mind, tell us anything that you have from interactions you've had with people, if you don't mind.
yeah. Well, I think ironically, one of the most, the coolest was while we were in the United States in Monument Valley. And I don't know how many people have been to Monument Valley, but if you haven't been there, go there right away.
Where is
Because
that?
Monument Valley is right on the border of Arizona and Colorado. It's right near what's called 4 Points, where four, and it's not, geez, I can't believe I'm blanking out on this. Let's see, Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, and Utah. And so, anyhow, it's very southern tip of Utah. It's in Navajo country, and it's famous because that's where John Wayne kind of got started. And so a whole lot of cowboy movies in the 50s and 60s were done there. And that's really what made it kind of this iconic place. And that's why I wanted to go there, because I grew up watching this stuff as a kid. And it was like, oh my God, I got to get there. So we got there, and it's when you enter, there are these red, it's just red, it's this deep brick kind of color as far as the eye can see. And there are these immense buttes that rise up hundreds of miles, so you just have this flat valley and then these giant rocks, that look like something thrust out of the ground by giants. And this is Navajo country. It's owned by the Navajo tribe. And so anyhow, you can go up there and you can get in your car and you can go and kind of drive around some of these places. They'll let you go everywhere. And as we were coming back out, I saw a corral, and I saw like 15 horses in the corral. They were all Mustangs, which means they're all wild. But they were broken because they were in a corral, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just stopped the car and I got out, and I'm kind of looking around because I thought maybe we could get on horseback, which would be so cool, And so a woman came out, and I write about this. I wrote a long dispatch about it, but she came out and she said, "Well, can I help you?" And she was native. And I said, "Well, is it possible to ride horses here?" And she said, she called out Jameson, and that's her husband. And he turned out to be a Navajo shaman, which is kind of like a minister. That's the way he described it. And he walked out and he said, "So what do you want to do?" And I said, "We'd like to see if we can get on horseback and ride through, Monument Valley." And he said, "Yeah, sure. Yeah, just come on over tomorrow around noon." And
Had you ridden horseback before?
Yeah,
Okay.
I had, and Cindy had a little bit. I've done more of it, but he said, "No, I think the names of the horses were Cochise and Crazy Horse." And so anyhow, he just turned out to be a really cool guy. And so he got us all set up, and we came back the next day and we got on. And I mean, to go through where these immense, rock formations are, it's a little bit like what they were like the icebergs that we saw, except they didn't move. They're just there are no trees or anything around them. They just rise up. And so when you're walking on horseback right next to them, looking at how huge they are. And then he was talking, I was asking about the Navajo people, and he talked about that. And I asked him he mentioned that he was a shaman. And I said, "Well, what's that like? And what does it mean?" And he said a really, really interesting thing as we were walking along. I said, "Well, what's the biggest problem you have, as a shaman with the people that you try to help?" And he said, "Well, people come to me and they say they want problems solved with their wife, or because they're drinking, or, whatever it is. And, I tell them, well, these are the things you should do to, so that you make better choices." And I said, so then what's the problem? And he said, well, they don't listen. He said they kind of nod their heads and say, yeah, and then they go back and do the same old things. And I thought, well, that sounds familiar in
Yeah.
human relationships.
Yeah.
And he said, I said, so what do you tell them? And he said, well, I tell them, how much weight can you carry? And I thought that was such an apropos way to put life, because if you keep making bad choices, that's what happens. You just keep loading more trouble on your back, and it breaks you. It wears you down.
Yeah. Spiritual, physically,
Yeah, emotionally,
Yep.
financially, a lot of times, in every which way. One bad choice after another is just like putting one more thing on top of your back. And so I thought that was just a beautiful way to simply put how to handle life, which was unload the baggage, make the right choices so that you can walk freely and you can walk, you can be mobile and you can do the things you want to do, not constantly be fighting the weight that you're carrying on your back. So that was a wonderful time. And there's a little interesting extra boost to the story, because after I wrote about it, and it was also on Facebook, and I get a email from this woman who's from the Netherlands, and she says, oh my God, I'm so glad to hear that Jameson is okay. And it turns out that she is from the Netherlands, but 20 years earlier had gone to Monument Valley and met Jameson, and they dated. And
what?
Yeah. And she had lost track of him and thought that he maybe had died because of COVID. And by the way, he almost did, and lost several other family members. But he survived it. And she said, I'm just so glad to hear that he's okay. Do you have a contact? And I gave her the contact, and she got back in touch with him. And then she went and visited him, and they sent me pictures back of them together.
Oh my gosh.
That was, so it was a great little loop in the story.
That is so
It's
wonderful.
very cool.
I am all about human connection. I think that travel plays such a big part in human connection, although it doesn't have to be. Like, we can connect with people every day in every walk of life. But
Right.
I love stories like that. And especially just makes you think how small the world is. And,
Mm-hmm.
and when you're talking about riding a horseback by these massive things, it also makes me think about like how insignificant I am in the grand scheme of things. And I want to make myself be more significant to the world in any way I can. But yeah, really, I mean, we're just small little pieces of what this amazing planet is. It's awesome.
Yeah. I mean, the metaphor that I use sometimes is that we're all like little neurons in a giant brain, and we're interacting with other neurons, and by doing that, we affect those neurons, and then those neurons affect other neurons. So each of us, in a way, by doing what we do, by communicating the way we do, changes the world. And
if we choose to, I mean, we can choose to stay in our bubbles, and then we just really kind of just is
then
what it
you
is.
atrophy.
But
You're just like you're a neuron that's dying, and you don't want to do that. So and that connects to me to curiosity and connecting, and all of that. I mean, curiosity is what drives us to connect with everything around us, including the people around us. We met a great guy in Chile that took us around, or set us up so that we could go to Torres del Paine, which is one of the most beautiful, spectacular places in the world, in Patagonia. We've been bailed out of one mistake that we made after another, or got lost in places.
For example?
I think the funniest one, well, not maybe the funniest, probably the one that comes to mind is we had to get from Paris to Barcelona, I think. We were trying to get south to Morocco, and we had to get a particular train, and we had gotten to Paris from London. And So we were told we had to go to another metro station, and so we could go into the metro and we go over to the other train station. Well, that turned out to be a fiasco, but we finally got that problem solved. And then we were coming back, and we're in the metro system, and it was a huge metro, so it was like 4 different levels, and we were trying to, so we were heading back up to the top, and we had 2 tickets, and we weren't quite sure why we had 2 tickets, but that was what we were given. And there we go. And so there was a woman who was trying to get out of the metro, and she had a baby carriage with her, and she was struggling to get through the metro. So I gave her one of my tickets. And Cindy, who never, drops any ticket for any reason, she threw one away because she said, well, what do we need it for? And so anyhow, we got back into the system, then we didn't have any other tickets. Turns out you have to have another ticket to get out of the metro and onto the street. So we were stuck inside the metro, and I'm going all over the place trying to figure out, is there some open door here? Is there some way to get out? I'm going up, all 4 levels and everything.
That's what you get for being a good Samaritan, Chip.
Right. And so finally, this poor guy, I see this guy, he's probably about 30 years old. He was looked like a businessman, just kind of trying to do his job, going back home. And I saw him, and I grabbed Sin by the elbow, and I went over to him and I grabbed him by his elbow as he was walking up to the turnstile. And he didn't understand what we were saying because I'm speaking English, but I said, we're going through with you. And he just kind of, looked at me, and he passed through, and we just went with him. We just stuffed ourselves in there and went with him. And then he ran as fast as he could away from us after we got through.
Get me away from these crazy Americans.
Yeah, really, really. But we got out at least, and we were able to continue our journey. But I don't know, we might have been stuck there forever. I guess eventually we would have found a gendarme somewhere, and he would have helped us. But
it's a good thing you weren't arrested or something.
I know. I mean, the guy could have turned on us, but luckily I think maybe he figured it out, but he sure didn't know what we were trying to do until we did it.
Well, that was one of my questions I was going to ask you too, and I think I know the answer. How many languages do you know?
Oh, I wish I knew way more. I have a smattering of Spanish and French. I always tried to learn enough to sort of get us by, or at least say hello. But, we've gone through 40 countries so far. That's a lot of languages. When we were going through the Baltic states, so that's Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, which, by the way, are fantastic, beautiful countries. That's another area that I think gets left out that people should visit. And the people are wonderful. But each of those languages, and they're not very big countries, they're small. Each of those languages is unique, completely different from the languages of the other countries. I thought, they'll be similar, And not only that, they're often jaw-breaking, so getting your mind around that, even if you're there for, a week, it's very hard beyond being able to say good morning and hello and, what's new or something like that. But I've been around, we spent a lot of time in Spanish Latin countries in both Spain and South America. So got to the point where I could say enough to get into trouble, begin a conversation and then I'm in over my head. So, I certainly can't discuss Nietzsche or, Sartre, or any of that.
So tell me, and I cannot believe we've already been talking for well over an hour, and just being mindful of time, although listen, I have no time limits. This is incredible. But what has been the most comical or frustrating language barrier experience you've had so far?
Well, language is always a barrier because, first of all, it just gets in the way of logistics. You want to go somewhere and you want to tell the ticket the ticket master that's in Portugal, that you want to go from this place to that place, and it takes 20 minutes to get it figured out. I think the most, I don't know, there was ultimately a resolution, but it was pretty frustrating. We were in Cairo, we were in Alexandria. We wanted to take the train to Cairo. So I said, well, let's walk over to the train station. And because we always found that if you went to the train station, because working online in a lot of these countries just doesn't work. And also the language issue, online is an issue. Even if it's translated, it can be an issue. But anyhow,
yeah, sometimes the words don't translate exactly the way they should, or
right. And sometimes the websites just don't work. Mm-hmm. And that is pretty much the case in Egypt. Don't count on any of that working. So we decided that we would walk over to the train station. And there was, of course, you get to the train station and it's mayhem, because the train stations get used there.
It's not just a tiny little, it's a massive station.
Right. Alexandria is a pretty big city. I think it's 4 million people. And Cairo is like pushing 20 million. So anyhow, their train stations are immense. And of course, you can't read any of the signs because they're in an alphabet that you don't understand. It's in Arabic. Mm-hmm. So you can't use any of that as a clue. And so we walked in, and we just kind of walk up to the ticket station and hope. I looked for the youngest guy I could find, thinking maybe he knows some English, and he knew a little bit of English. But when you're from the United States and you are getting a ticket there, they don't just like punch your ticket and give it to you because you're an American, and therefore you have a different ticket. You have to pay much more as an American than you do if you're Egyptian, which makes sense to me because mm-hmm. the inflation rates are, get out of hand, and, these people can't afford, what we can afford, mm-hmm. basically what Sure. it comes down to. And so anyhow, I'm trying to figure out what he's doing. I tell him, I try to tell him we want to take the train at 2:00 tomorrow. Just saying those things is very, very difficult when he doesn't understand what I'm saying and I can't tell him in Arabic. But eventually, somehow we, by gesturing and everything, and writing notes, figured out that we wanted the 2:00 train. Then he goes, kind of waves to me and leaves. So we're like, well, okay, what's happening? Did he just leave, or
like a goodbye wave, or like a?
No, just. Well, I wasn't sure,
Okay.
Like, are we done? Or, and so I just stood there, Cindy and I are just standing there. And a couple of minutes later, he comes back. And now he has like 3 guys with him. And he explains, writing ticket, so now, so to have this ticket, you have to have it handwritten, because they don't have a ticket that can just be printed that works for us. So this goes to show you how many Americans, are in Alexandria. 0.
Yeah.
We
Almost
stood
none,
out
yeah.
we stood out like a sore thumb anywhere we went. Kids would take pictures of us and stuff because they're like, what is that? And so so anyhow, he starts to fill this out, and then he's going back to one of the other 3 guys, and they're all talking, going back and forth. And I mean, this went on for like 15 minutes, and he's very carefully writing everything down. And then finally, he hands us this piece of paper. It just looked like it was torn from somewhere, but there was carbon, on all the other, and so we had a piece of the carbon copied paper. And I looked at it and I said, "This is the ticket," I'm pointing to it, and he's like nodding his head. And I said, "Oh, okay, I guess we have a ticket." It just looked like a piece of paper, that, mm-hmm. and we had no idea what it said, So anyhow, we eventually get back to our hotel where some folks spoke English, and showed it to them and said, "Is this really a ticket? And does it really leave tomorrow at 2 o'clock?" And they looked at it, and even they had to kind of squint and figure it out. And they said, "Yeah, yeah." So take a cab over there tomorrow. And we
Wow.
did, and we got on the train and we got to Cairo. And
That's
once we got to
incredible.
Cairo, it was a different issue.
And this is within your current travels, like within the last few years, or was
Yeah,
this
yeah.
prior?
It was just
Yeah,
a couple months ago.
that's
Just a
the
couple
crazy
months
part
ago.
to me is that like this sounds like something that would have happened, maybe when you were traveling 20 years ago or something, or even
Yeah,
longer. But this
yeah.
is today.
One of the things that I certainly learned as we traveled, that the more you know, the more you realize you don't know, and the more you're enlightened at the same time. And the stories that the people you meet tell are just a tiny, you know, bit of the enormous story of the human race.
Hmm.
And every time I see somebody, if I see someone on the street in Cairo, or as we're traveling into India, I just want to know what's their story, because I guarantee it'll be interesting.
Yeah,
I mean, really, no story is boring.
yeah.
Even if people think it's themselves that it's boring, it's not. You just have to ask the right questions, and that sounds like what you're really trying to do.
It
And that's pretty cool.
it it is. That's the secret, but that is the truth. That's really what I'm trying to do is, and your life is so extraordinary. Your life is so inspiring. The things that you've done and are doing still today, like don't I hope
Oh,
you never discount what you're doing as far as having impact on other people, because not only are you doing it and you're showing people that it can be done, but you're making it a point to have interaction with other people, which is just it's so important human interaction in and of itself is so important, and I don't think any of us have enough of it. And I think a couple things I'll say. I have no affiliation with them, but there is a YouTube channel called Discover Connection, which I think
mm-hmm,
everyone should check out. It's a
mm-hmm,
beautiful, beautiful channel where that's all it's about is travel and meeting people and just connecting human beings together and realizing that we are not that different. Doesn't matter where we're from,
right.
what country we live in. He purposely traveled to Russia and the Ukraine back to back within the
Mm-hmm.
last year just to spend time with people there, and it's beautiful. It brings
It's a
tears
great
to your
idea.
eyes.
Yeah, I like that.
And not only that, I will mention there was a movie back in the 90s, and you're into kind of like the sci-fi-ish thing. Do you remember a movie called Strange Days?
I'm sorry, I don't.
It, you may it may be worth a watch for you.
Yeah, sure.
I'm trying to remember. Ralph Fiennes, I believe, was in it. So if there was anyone that
Yeah.
was like famous, it was him. But and Angela Bassett, I think. The premise of it was that there was enough technology that had been produced where you could actually wear this apparatus on your head, and it would record not just your visuals but your emotional and
Your
your like
thoughts,
physical
yeah,
feelings,
feeling.
like everything about whatever was actually happening, and then somebody else could put that on. So I mean, you're talking about VR on crack, like
Yeah,
true emotion, like actually physically feeling the things that happened. And
yeah.
I
Wow.
was thinking as I'm listening to some of your stories, if this technology actually existed, which who knows, maybe it does today, you'll be the
Yeah.
person to find out. You could be a billionaire with I would absolutely subscribe and buy and own every minute of every experience you've had, because
Oh, well,
we
that's
barely touched anything, but I just can tell from what we've talked about already, like your experiences are so deep and meaningful and just
well,
incredible.
that's very, very kind of you. Thank you.
Yeah, it's the
But
truth.
well, thanks. We're lucky, you know, to be able to do this, and it's a gift, that we are able to do it. And yeah, if we're going to do it, we want to, experience as much as we possibly can, and not take any of it for granted, and try to share it the best way that we can. And I wish I
Mhm.
had one of those machines. What'd you say it was called? Strange Days?
Strange Days was the name of the movie. It was mid
Okay.
'90s, maybe '95.
Yeah,
I'm not sure.
I'll look it up. But I mean, I wish that we had that kind of technology. Of course, it would put a writer like me out of business. But
Well,
the best that I can, I will try to write it in a way that people can feel that, what it was, some of what we experienced, uh, and enjoy it, and
yeah.
maybe go to those places and experience it themselves.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And I hope some of that happens too. Like for me, it's about like again, like I said, the humanity, the stories, the just the entertainment and learning about these places. But I would love people to be inspired to go to places. And I've heard people say that, geez, I didn't know about this place, and I hope to
Yeah,
go someday. And so I hope that it encourages some people to actually get out there and travel. And that's the first step, I think, is just you don't have to have these momentous experiences. You got to start somewhere. And the first step is get out of your house, get out of your town. Or
yeah,
even, you know what? Maybe the first step is explore your town because
yeah.
there's so much
Sure.
around Pittsburgh, in and around Pittsburgh, that I haven't even experienced.
Oh, yeah.
I go away,
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah. No, there's
there's
tons of history. It's a fascinating
hmm,
city and history, and I
just
just
be
may as well
curious.
say that's actually on the list in the pipeline of books. I'm mostly working on novels now, but I am working on a book that's the 20 Pittsburghers that changed the world, which is a kind of history of Pittsburgh, and we hope to have that out within 2 years. So I've been researching that too, but I'm with you. It's a great city.
Yeah, you're so busy. I mean, and I mean that literally. Like you're so busy, but hey, you did it to yourself, buddy. So
I know. That's what my wife always says. She goes, you're the boss, and your boss is rough.
well,
He's way
listen.
too hard on you.
I'll say though, you found the right woman. It sounds like you found the right woman.
Absolutely, absolutely. Cindy is a rock, and she's a rock in our family, and she is a rock when we're traveling. She just rolls with it, and she enjoys it. And I think, I don't know if I mentioned it, but we're going to Choquequirao. We're in tents. No toilets, no running water, nothing like that anywhere. And she hadn't even been camping in her life. So,
Oh my God.
and she's on mules, and there's 1,000-foot drop down below, and she just rolled with it. And and
Wow.
enjoys it. And loves telling stories about it. So
I
it's
love it. I'd love to
yeah,
do another
you're
episode and
right.
have the two of you on together. I would love to hear her take on some of the things.
I would too. Well, I'll try to talk her into it. She generally says she doesn't want to, but she tells great stories. So I'd
Yeah,
love to have her, on sometime.
it'd be
I'll
a
let
lot
you
of
know.
fun because I think
Yeah,
that that's one of the other things too is when you travel with someone else, especially someone else who's into it and is passionate about it. Hearing the different perspectives of the same story is really fantastic because you play off each other and you remind
yeah,
each other of things that maybe you didn't see or you didn't remember. And that's one of the most fun things about storytelling for me when it comes to travel.
yeah, absolutely. And she'll come up with ideas that don't occur to me, or ways to get out of trouble that don't occur to me. So yeah, it's
I mean, don't
definitely
get
good
yourself
to.
into trouble, first of all, but
Somehow it always happens. I don't know why.
well, listen, I'm glad your voice held up.
Yeah.
You were a trooper. This was fantastic. I have 5 final questions to ask you if you're game. And again, honestly, it happens sometimes that these turn into little stories, and I'm okay with that. I don't have a
Mhm.
restriction on time. I just want to be respectful of yours. So if you're
Okay.
ready, I will start with question number one.
Okay. Go for it.
All right. So, question number one, and I'm very careful to phrase it the way that I do, is of all of the places in the world that you have ever been, where was your most memorable meal experience and what was it? It's got to be
Oh,
tough.
wow. Yeah, that is tough. Um,
And I
struggle.
say one, but you know,
Yeah. Uh, wow. I mean, so many come to mind. When we were in Cairo, a young man that we met on the Camino Way, who happens to be Egyptian. Well, when we got to Cairo, we said, Michael, we'd love to have dinner with you. And he said, I will take you to a good place to have dinner. And so it wasn't necessarily the food was the best in the world.
Can I interrupt you real quick and ask you why? What was the connection with Michael that made you decide to do that? Because you don't just do that with anybody, right?
No. Well, Michael walked with us into Santiago de Compostela, the place where St. James is buried.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was the end of the road. It was the end of the Camino Way. And we had walked, 100 kilometers over the previous 5 days. And the last day we met him and we walked in with him. And he was such a positive, great guy, just so fun, so thoughtful, so positive, and he was just going to be moving back home, and working for his dad's business in Cairo. And so I said, we're going to get to Cairo. And he said, when you get to Cairo, you look me up. And so we did. And we had, he was about to run a triathlon in New Zealand.
Oh my gosh.
Anyhow, we had dinner with him, and it was all very local, extremely local place with a particular kind of bird whose name I can't remember that's stuffed and given to you, and all kinds of, Egyptian food is delicious. It's Mediterranean, it's classic Mediterranean food. And so it was probably more about being with him, but the food was great, but it wasn't a fancy hotel or anything like that.
Was it Hammam Mashi?
No, I don't think so.
Stuffed pigeon? No. Looks like that was
Yeah. That's what it was. Stuffed pigeon, but there was a different bird than pigeon, because I asked him if it was squab, and he said no, it was a different bird. But they were small, and so it was a great evening. It was just a good time.
It's wonderful. And I love that. Sometimes it's not like the food may be good, but it's the experience itself and the people you're with. And
I think honestly, the best food we've ever had was in Morocco. And almost any of the, whether it was Fez or Marrakesh or Tangier, almost any time we ate. The tangine, that they make, which is unique. It's just the spices. I think there's 80 spices that go into it, so it's spectacular. So that's a close second.
Awesome. Okay, so question 2, moving on, is of all of the places in the world that you have ever been, even if I offered you a free trip, you would say, no, thank you, I don't want to go back.
Can't help you.
And why, if there is? No? Okay.
There hasn't been a place that we've been that I've said, "Oh my God, get me out of here."
And it doesn't have to be that. It could also be like, "Hey, we've been there, and I feel like we've experienced it, and we're done." And if there's not an answer, I've had that too. It's fine.
Yeah, it might be a place like that everybody goes to, but even Venice, even Rome, I would probably go back to them because they're just so rich. It's just that you have to fight, all the tourists and traffic and everything. But I really can't think. Nothing comes to mind that I wouldn't go back to if I had the time.
Yeah, and I've said too, like, it's not only just you can always go to a different area of the same place you've been, but things change. Things change rapidly sometimes, even in ancient cities. Things just change, and so it's worth it to go back.
Yeah, that's for sure. I'd love to go back to Istanbul, because that's my favorite city.
Okay, well, so maybe that's the answer for my next question. Okay. Because my next question is flipping it 180, is of all the places in the world that you have been, where do you absolutely have to go back?
Yeah, I'm sorry about some of the politics that are kind of unfolding in Turkey, but Istanbul was spectacular. It was just so vibrant, so people are so nice. There's so much history there. It's big. It's beautiful. It's vibrant. It's growing fast. and there's 7,000 years of history. So, for me, with given all those things, all that architectural beauty, all that history, how great the people are, how delicious the food is, and how vibrant and alive it is now, after 7,000 years of existence. It's pretty, that's my favorite place.
Something through this podcast is calling me to Turkey, and not just the podcast. Like, I have talked to people outside of the podcast as well, but something within the last, I'm going to say 3 months, over and over and over and over again, I keep getting hit with Turkey, 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 Turkey. And so I think that might be, besides going to New Zealand to visit my daughter before she moves to Spain, I think Turkey is really high on my list. So
yeah. I mean, as a city goes, it's hard to beat, and it's a fascinating country. That part of the world, of course, is just, there's so much history. So I think it's a good move. Of course, New Zealand won't be bad either. We're looking forward to getting there.
Yeah, I'm excited. Although I just found out tonight that she has to move because the people are selling the building she just moved into in the last 9 months. But either way, she'll still be she's in Wellington, and that's, I think, where they'll stay. And so, it'll be all right.
Good.
Yeah.
Hell, you'll be in New Zealand. That won't be bad.
That's exactly right. So question 4 is, of all the places in the world that you haven't been, where, I know you have places you are going, but if you just had to choose, not bucket list, because bucket lists I feel like are long. Although I just learned today, by the way, did you know that the term bucket list started with the movie Bucket List? It did not exist before that movie. Back in like 2007. It feels like it's been around forever.
I remember that. I don't know. I find that hard to believe. I thought that it had been used before that, but who knows? Maybe not.
Yeah. Well, I listened to a podcast called Smartless, and they had somebody on who was involved in the movie, and they said, the person who created the phrase bucket list was involved with the movie, and that was how it all started, was because of the movie, and not vice versa. So
yeah, that's a funny movie, actually.
So, but yeah, so not bucket list, but if like you couldn't finish your travels that you have to go, where's the 1 or 2 places that you still would absolutely have to get to that you've never been?
Vietnam and New Zealand. Vietnam, I hear, some people say is the most beautiful place they've ever been.
Also on my list of like top 3.
Yeah. And so we're looking forward to that. We're going to be taking the train from, I guess it'll be Hanoi to Ho Chi Minh City, or Ho Chi Minh City to Hanoi. And then New Zealand, I mean, it just looks geographically so spectacular. And I understand, people are wonderful. And I guess there is an advantage whenever you're in a country where you can speak the same language, and therefore, I mean, one of the sad things about not being fluent in every language in the world is that you can't get into really deep conversations with people. You can have really nice experiences, but you can't. There's only so far the language will allow you to go, in terms of storytelling and thoughts and so I miss that whenever I'm in a country where I can't speak the language fluently. So New Zealand is a twofer. Vietnam, I guess we'll just see what happens, see who we meet, and enjoy the history and beauty of that place. Cambodia, it's right next door. That too.
Yeah, and I love the idea of what I've heard of Vietnam in that, with everything that we went through as a country there, the people just love. I don't know if they necessarily love Americans coming in or if it's just foreigners coming in, but they're so inquisitive and they're so they just want to be part of things, and they're just so appreciative of people coming and experiencing their land and their country. And my preconception would be that they would be hesitant and resistant of Americans, but my experience of what I've seen through the lens of other people is the exact opposite.
Yeah, that's what That's what I've heard too from a lot of people that have come back. That they love Americans, but I think, I mean, they might love French too. So
Yes, right. I don't know that, but I feel like it might be the
but
truth.
yeah. But I think they're just very kind, wonderful people.
Yep, that's the feeling I get as well. So yeah, it's a place I want to go. And once you get there, I understand the cost is just it's
Yeah,
so incredibly inexpensive once you're there if you play it right.
right,
It can be.
right.
So
Yeah, that's what I've heard too.
so
So that'll be one place that won't cost an arm and a leg.
hmm So the final question is a loaded question for you. For most of my guests, it is very, very basic. But for you, it's different. So you don't have to tell everything, but normally this is super easy. Where are you going? That's the first time I've ever laughed out loud after asking that question because
It's usually one place that you're going.
it's usually one or two, maybe three over the next 6 months.
Yeah. I mean, the very next place we'll go is Dubai, and then we'll work our way into India and Mumbai, and then Nepal, and then Bhutan, and after that, Vietnam, Cambodia, uh, Thailand, Malaysia. We hope we can take a ship then to Australia. I'd love to go through Indonesia, but I don't think Cindy wants to lengthen the trip any more than I've already lengthened it. And then New Zealand, and then we'll probably come back from New Zealand and see if we can find a ship that will take us to the United States. Originally, we were going to go up to China and Tokyo. I mean, not Tokyo, Japan, and go way north and try to get to Alaska. But Sin has asked that I try to move along. And once we hit the seventh continent, which is Australia, then head home. She said we can always come back and visit those places, and we will.
Yeah.
But I also want to, get all the way around the planet because I want to write about this, and I can't write about it whenever I'm traveling, and I have other books to write. So it's time to finish it up. It'll be extraordinary, all those places, but it's time to wrap it up and start to write about it.
Yeah. Officially wrap it up, right? Like
Yeah.
you said.
Yeah. Sort of put a bow on it. Say we did it.
Yeah.
And I do want to get it done. I don't want to say, "Hey, we've got 75% of
Oh, there's no
the way
way.
around the world." Yeah. So
Yeah.
soon we hope in a year and a half to 2 years we'll be done. But that's still a long time.
It is. But it goes by in a flash, whether you like it or not. So, and I
sure
think,
does.
for the listeners that, catch up by going to the websites and checking everything out and then, follow along as things go on because it's an amazing
Yeah.
journey and you're getting things from a perspective that, it's one of a kind and very unique. I literally, I mean this from the bottom of my heart. I cannot thank you enough for spending this time with me. And I know how valuable your time is, almost more than most that I talk to, because you have so much going on between writing this, writing that, editing, publishing, and planning. And, so for someone who doesn't necessarily have a true quote unquote 9 to 5, like full-time job, you may be the busiest individual that I've ever talked to as far as just your time is so valuable and it means so much to me that you did this with me.
Well, thanks, and I hope it's something that other people enjoy. And yeah, I'm lucky to be able to do it, and I'm happy to do it, and I hope I never have to stop doing it because life is short, and you want to use up every moment you have.
Yeah, somebody told me one of my episodes, they said something that really hit home for me. And they said that my life is measured in heartbeats. And you filled so many of those heartbeats for me. And that was so meaningful. And so like that struck a chord with me. And I love that like phrasing or that way of putting it into perspective.
That's a wonderful way to look at it.
The heartbeats we shared over the last couple of hours is I wouldn't trade it in for anything. This has been really incredible, and I hope that the listeners also get that same sense out of it. And I really do hope that, at some point when you get a break, you come back home and we can have some time to talk again, and we can kind of reconnect and, maybe even meet up again and have some more Arnold Palmers and just kind of BS a little bit about, what you've been going through and what you've experienced. Because
Sure.
I think you're an extraordinary human being, and I really enjoyed this. So
Oh,
thank
well,
you so much.
Thank you. You're very kind. Thank you. And yes, I look forward to doing that again because, it's always good to talk with other people. It's all about communication.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. Good luck in everything that you're doing, Chip. And I hope that most everything goes smooth for you. I hope you hit a few roadblocks here and there, because those create those experiences and stories that you will never forget. And if you don't have any hurdles and everything is smooth sailing, then it's just, it's maybe not as fun and impactful as overcoming those things. But I hope Cindy doesn't have any major issues, and everything's just.
No, she's the first. He kind of coined the phrase that, the most difficult things that we experience also make the greatest stories.
Yes,
so
it's awesome.
That is true. As long as we get out alive on the other end, it's all good.
Yeah, that would be ideal. So yeah, we'll talk soon. Thank you so much again, Chip, and take care.
Thank you. Thanks for taking the time too. I appreciate it.
And there's another episode of the Where Have You Been podcast in the books. Thank you so much for listening today. It was another great guest with some great stories, as always, and I hope that you will support all of the guests by checking out the show notes and going to their web pages, seeing any socials and projects that they may have going on. And please, again, I'll ask as always to like, subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. It really does help to allow the podcast to grow and reach more people, and I appreciate you for doing that. Also, if you haven't done so, check out the website, whybpodcast.com, where you can find blog posts. If you'd like to be a guest, please register to be a guest on the site, and check out the merch page. There's some really cool stuff if you're interested in representing the pod, along with some other cool travel items and apparel that I'm working on every day as well. Join me again next week for another great guest with more incredible stories. New episodes drop every Sunday just after midnight Eastern Time. Until then, thank you for being here, and have a great day.